This is a presentation about the eligibility process for special education services. In this presentation, you will learn about important information and timelines related to eligibility for special education services and the process for completing an evaluation for special education services. The first step in the special education eligibility process is the request for an evaluation. The request can be made either by a parent or the school as either an initial evaluation or a reevaluation. Within 14 school days, there is a decision to proceed. At this stage, the district meets with the parent to determine whether an evaluation should proceed. If it's yes, then the district needs to determine what domains will be evaluated and will request the parent's consent to do the evaluation. Step 3 is the referral or domain meeting. Anytime a student is going to be evaluated, initial evaluation or reevaluation, a referral or domain meeting is held to determine what areas are relevant to the student, what information will be collected, and who will collect it. This is the meeting where you get parent consent to evaluate. This starts the evaluation timeline. This is the paperwork for the parent-guardian consent for evaluation. As you can see, there are multiple columns in here with the different domains that are possible to be evaluated in. If it's relevant to evaluate the student, yes or no, existing information about the child in that specific domain, any additional evaluation data that is needed, and what source that data will be obtained from. The consent for evaluation, team members review the domains for relevance and mark the box accordingly as seen on the previous page. Existing information is summarized for each domain, and this information can be based on test scores, work samples, observations, and other records that exist. Any needed information for each domain is recorded. How that information will be obtained is documented in the final box. This often includes the title of the team member that will be collecting the data. This information is reviewed with the child's parent or guardian prior to obtaining consent from them to evaluate the child. All planned evaluations must be included in this document and reviewed with the parent. Parents sign and date consent form, and that's basically them giving permission for the team to collect the needed data. We will look at the yellow box on the next slide to show you exactly where on that form this will be, consent will be given. This is the parent-guardian consent for an evaluation or a reevaluation. And as you can see at the top, there's the date, the student's name, their date of birth, and it is basically just kind of a letter to the parent or guardian asking for their consent to evaluate. And you can see here that there is a box where they check that they agree or do not agree. And then in this yellow box here is where they're giving consent to collect additional evaluation data. So this is the parent giving the okay that the data that was stated on the previous page with all of the different columns, the parent consents to the student being evaluated in all of those different areas and collecting those additional pieces of evaluation data. So the parent would check whether or not they give consent, date it, and sign it. So once the parent has given consent, we're in step 4, the evaluation process. And it is so important to adhere to this 60 school day timeline. Do not be the reason that there is a delay for your school district. You want to make sure that you are on time with your evaluations. If you need to make a change to the evaluation plan that you originally had listed on the domain grid, you must get parent consent for any changes that are going to be made. The next step is the actual eligibility conference and IEP meeting, step 5. So here, results of the evaluation are shared and a determination regarding special education eligibility is made by the entire team, which includes the parents. The last and final step is step 6, and this is the consent for placement. So if it is determined that a student is eligible for special education services, an IEP cannot be implemented sooner than 10 school days unless written consent is provided by the parent to start that timeline sooner for that student to have their placement in their special education classes or with their special education services. Every once in a while, you'll get something which is called a 3-in-1 meeting. So in some instances, a district has sufficient data to determine eligibility without collecting any additional data. In these instances, you may have what's called a 3-in-1 meeting, in which the team agrees that no additional data is needed. So that referral or domain meeting, at that time, they determine that there is no additional data needed in any of those domain areas. And therefore, because they have that much data during this meeting, they will determine the eligibility based on the existing data. So they're having the referral or domain meeting, the eligibility conference, and then they develop an IEP, or they dismiss the student from special education services if data has been collected showing that the student no longer needs special education services or doesn't need special education services in the first place. So that's the 3-in-1, the referral or domain, determining that no additional data is needed, and then going straight into eligibility, and then going into either developing the IEP or dismissing the student from special education services. So in this scenario, the domain grid extensively documents the known data column, which is reviewed before the parent consents to no additional data being needed. If this is the case with the 3-in-1 meeting where no additional data is needed, this is where the parent or guardian will agree with the determination that no additional data is needed, or maybe they do not agree that no additional data is needed. So they will check whichever box that they are agreeing or disagreeing with, and then date and sign. In determining eligibility, each disability has its own set of criteria, and the different eligibility categories are autism, deafness, emotional disability, intellectual disability, orthopedic impairment, specific learning disability, traumatic brain injury, deaf blindness, developmental delay, hearing impaired, multiple disabilities, other health impairment, speech and language impairment, and visual impairment. So in determining eligibility, at the eligibility conference, the data that was gathered and any existing data is reviewed. And then based on the analysis of the evaluation data, the team identifies the primary disability, or if there are a primary and a secondary disability, those are identified. The IEP team should identify the primary disability and then any secondary disability if it's appropriate. The primary disability determination is the disability that is primarily impacting the learner. The eligibility paperwork then is completed to summarize the data that was collected, and the team, including parents, determine if the student is eligible for special education services under one or more of the disability categories. And then once that happens, the IEP is developed by the team. So in conclusion, decisions regarding eligibility are made by a team, which includes the child's parent or guardian. The steps in the process must be completed within required timelines and documented. Parent consent must be obtained prior to completing any evaluation and prior to initial placement in special education. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation on eligibility. Please let me know if you have any questions.